Okay, like very many people, I'm not going to be exactly doing what I said I was going to do. Not very surprising. Okay, but anyhow, I'll start. So I stand here as a linguist. I don't stand here as a computational linguist or a computer scientist or what have you. I stand here as a linguist. Yeah. So my main interest is let's say linguistic description of objects I'm interested in. Okay. Right. So anyhow. Now, being here at Brown University is a great honor for various reasons. I mean, it's a great honor to be here with you together and have these discussions. But for me as a linguist and also a computational linguist, it's a particular honor because some great people work here or did work here who have been very influential in the field of linguistics in general and in particular in computational linguistics and corpus linguistics. And one of these people was mentioned by Sid yesterday. That was Eugene Cherniak, and I would say Eugene Cherniak was probably the initiator of statistical natural language processing. Now, we have had this approach to natural language processing maybe in the last 15, 20 years or so, and before that everything was rule-based and symbolically oriented and stuff like that. And when it all happened, it came as a great shock to everybody. Maybe a similar shock, like Fotis' shock. Okay, how can it be that when I count the words, I come up with the same classifications of a text I've been thinking about for years and things like that. Yeah, okay. But anyhow, so that's computational linguistics. So these models, they're not data models. I don't know what to call things anymore. Anyhow, after 3 days, but okay, they've been very influential. And me as a linguist, the shocked I was when I first learned that you can do everything with statistics, have become a very helpful tool. And I'm going to show you some of this in this talk. Okay, so that's computational linguistics. But then there's another person who worked at Brown University, who actually owns a number of patents I found yesterday on the net, and this is Henry Kojiro. And Henry Kojiro has also been very influential in the field of computational linguistics, but also corpus linguistics, because Henry Kojiro and his colleague Nelson Francis, they compiled the so-called Brown corpus. Now, this is a corpus that was compiled here at Brown University in the late 1960s, and a small corpus to today's standards, just 1 million tokens, but it was supposed to reflect at the time, or to give a snippet of contemporary American English at the time, collecting texts or text extracts from 1,000 samples of text and covering 15 different registers or text types, if you want. Now, this resource was also not influential, but perhaps very useful. It was very useful to have this resource for computational linguistics. A lot of computational linguistic tools and programs have just grabbed this corpus and trained their programs on this corpus. But it was also, at the same time, important in corpus linguistics because it was kind of the first resource of its kind, representing something like, contemporary American English. Yeah? So also linguists, corpus linguists, they used this corpus and they extended this corpus. There's also a British English version of this corpus, the Lob corpus, and then there are later versions, diachronically later versions of texts from the 1990s. So this became kind of the base for a diachronic corpus of British and American English. Okay, so having said that, I think, so there are many threads in my talk, but there will be 2 threads at least, and maybe a third one, but I don't know whether I can take it to the end. So that's the role of computational linguistic products in our work, yeah, such as parsers and taggers and things like that, yeah, the practice of doing something, approaching a linguistic question with corpus linguistic methods. Okay, so, but before I start showing this work I'm doing currently in my group, let me try to pull things together again a little bit. So I'm a linguist, I said. So as a linguist, I'm a bit different from other philologists, I guess. I'm different from Fortis as a literary studies person. I'm not a historian, and so on and so on. But what is it that we're actually all interested in? So at first sight, okay, it seems there are many differences, and one difference is probably that as a literary studies person, like Fortis, I'm interested in textual artifacts that have some particular sociocultural value, that are valued very much in a culture, yeah? Like, for example, this poem. And when I'm in the arts or in art history, then it's the same thing. I'm interested in this unique object, and I want to say something about this unique object. As a linguist, it's different. I don't care. Yeah? I take any object that is text. I don't talk about pictures. But for a linguist, it looks a bit more mundane, and we come back to the food metaphor. So as a linguist, I'm interested in things like this. Yeah. So maybe you can't see properly, but there are letters in this soup. Yeah. It's a letter and carrot soup. So when I first look at the text, yeah, I don't care. Yeah. It's not exactly true, but okay, I don't care so much. It's a text, and maybe I have some hypothesis about the text, but maybe I don't. So first of all, I just consider it as an unordered unit of things, and my first urge, the first thing I want to do, yeah, is I want to put some order. I want to create some order. And so if I apply it to the soup, I want to do something like this. Actually, this also happens to me with the carpet, and I keep staring at this carpet, and I try to find some pattern. And, okay, yeah. So this is the first urge. It's not the ultimate thing I want to do, but this is something I feel I need to do. Okay, so now let me try to pull this together again. I think what still unites us, no matter, yeah, literary studies, historians, is that we're interested in this semiotic artifact. So it's not a natural, it's not a physics phenomenon or anything like that. It's a semiotic artifact. It's created by humans, and all of us were interested somehow in these 3 aspects of a semiotic artifact, and we're interested in the relations between these 3 aspects of a semiotic artifact. Now, the difference is that I think when you are a literary studies person or arts person or art historian, or maybe even, yeah, a library science person, you're more interested in this part of the triangle. Yeah, you're interested in the thought, in the concept, maybe in the social. The thought could also be the social. It's not necessarily the cognitive. Yeah, it could also be the social, and something in the world. Yeah, which is perhaps the referent of that. Now, when you're a linguist, I think you're more on this side. You're very much interested in the symbol, in the sense of signifiant. So you like playing around with that. So when you see these letters on the floor, you want to do something to them. And then you're very cautious in actually making this link to the thought. Yeah? But you would never start with a thought, yeah? Or rarely. at least not if you're that type of linguist I am. Yeah. Okay, there might be others. There will be others. Yeah. So maybe, yeah, we can think about this a little bit. So, yeah, but maybe one more sentence about this. So when I come back to Foote's dilemma, yeah, so your dilemma is really when you find something at the level of the symbol, like you have counted the words, or something that, some unit that may seem quite arbitrary to you, then how do you relate this to the thought, to the level of the thought in this model? Yeah. Okay, but I see the dilemma. I also have it. Okay, so the question then is, for a linguist, how do I get from the unordered soup to the ordered soup, and beyond it? And this is what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, now, so I would start from something like this, or a collection of this, and then, and it's just a common practice now in corpus linguistics, I would apply some tools to automatically or also to manually annotate these texts. Maybe I would even already call that a corpus. So I annotate them, and then I get another version of the corpus which has been annotated, which has been enriched with information, and perhaps I also have various formats, this corpus in various formats. I'm going to speak about formats as well in a second. Okay, so far so good. So this part, it's quite well understood, and nobody questions that this is how you do it. Yeah? But then how do you proceed? Well, you got the corpus there, it has been enriched with other types of information, but then what do you do? Because what you want to do is an analysis. Yeah? The annotation is not the analysis. You just take it for granted, you don't care about it. You rely on the part of speech taggers, syntactic parsers, lemmatizers, tokenizers, and so on, yeah? which have their own models. But then what do you do? Yeah, so you have to find, in this annotated resource, you have to find some interesting or relevant features, features that are relevant for what you actually look at or look for, your analysis goal. You have to find these features, you have to extract instances of these features. Then you get a set of instances, yeah? And once you have the set of instances, you want to inspect these instances further, and you also want to evaluate them with respect to an initial question you have had. Okay, so this is a basic process, but this part of the process is much harder. It's much harder to model, and it's, yeah, just much harder to instantiate. Okay, so I make this more concrete with some examples now. Okay, what I'm interested or have been interested in for the last few years is linguistic variation, and not in the sense of dialect variation or social variation, strictly speaking, but what we call register variation. So that is variation in the language according to the use the language is put. Now, this could be, let's say, I don't know, scientific language is a certain set of registers in this terminology, or conversation is some kind of a register, and so on. Now, register theory, or what we observe in language, what makes a register really at the symbol level, at the level of the code, is that a register is characterized by a cluster of associated features, which are typically lexicogrammatical features, which have a greater than random tendency to co-occur. Yeah? So this is how we observe a register. Now, registers are typically relatively stable in time. You know, you can observe that registers diachronically, they're relatively stable, but when you look at the repertoire of registers in a language, they will change, yeah? Because the situations in which we use a language will change as well. Yeah? So that's just as a background. Now, the concrete project we're conducting at with my group is we're interested in how these registers emerge, how do they come about, what's happening when new registers, new ways of saying come about, and we investigate the context in which new scientific fields or academic fields, disciplines emerge through the contact of some existing disciplines. And we think of this as a contact situation where, I don't know, for example, computer science and biology come into contact and a new discipline is formed, which we call bioinformatics, or you have computer science and linguistics, and you have computational linguistics, yeah? So we call these contact disciplines. So we are interested in what are the linguistic properties of these contact disciplines, yeah? So when you take bioinformatics, is it linguistically, purely linguistically speaking, is it more like computer science, is it more like biology, or is it something completely different? And so what we need to do is we have to compare the linguistic, the discourses that are produced by these disciplines. So what we're after is the similarities and differences between them, and also asking whether these new emerging disciplines create their own language. We have to be able to say whether they create something that you can call distinctive of the others. Okay, so that's the concrete context. Now, if you have this question, and here I come again to corpus linguistics, what is the kind of resource you need to be able to investigate this question? Now, of course, you have to build a corpus. Yeah, you have to build a corpus that consists of scientific text. Now, what we have done, we built a corpus of just English journal articles, so we don't consider any other text types, as it were, just journal articles, no project reports, no patents, no whatever, yeah, just journal articles. We cover nine disciplines, which you can see here. And we have two time slices in the corpus, so we have the early 2000s and we have the 1970s and 80s, because this is about the time that some of these disciplines have emerged. So eventually we want to investigate how linguistically these registers have evolved. Yeah? So, and what we typically do then, we're interested in the relationship within triples in this corpus. So, for instance, the relationship between computational linguistics and computer science, or the relationship between bioinformatics, computer science and biology, linguistically speaking. Yeah? Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the diachronic aspect of this, so I'm just talking about the discipline aspect of this. Okay. Now, in terms of encoding, well, the sources we got the corpus from were PDF files, and then you can imagine what we had to do to the PDF files to get something out of them that was processable in some sense. Now, we have different versions of the corpus in terms of different formats. Plain text, HTML and XML version, and one version that is encoded in the format of the corpus query processor, and I come back to this. Now, the types of information we encode for the corpus is bibliographical data, as you can see here, the discipline, also the logical structure of the documents, and then in terms of the linguistics, linguistic units, sentences, tokens, and so on, and then some linguistic categories that can be annotated automatically. Okay. Now, one of the formats that is very useful to us is this is a very simple format, as you can see here. That's the format used by this corpus query processor, which was developed at the University of Stuttgart. So we basically just have a tab-separated format where we encode the token, the lemma, or the values for the token, the lemma, and the part of speech, and we can add others. Yeah, we could add others. So it's a very simple format. Okay, now which analysis methods are needed to work on this resource? Well, like I said, what we have to do is, the whole thing is an exercise of comparison and detecting between the different subcorpora, detecting similarities and differences. So in that sense, it's very similar to what Fotis showed us before on his data. Yeah? So what we want to compare things according to is register on the one hand, and then eventually also time, so the diachronic aspect. What we compare things in terms of is lexicogrammatical features. And I show you examples of this in a minute. Yeah? And we want to compare lexicogrammatical features or distributions of lexicogrammatical features in some context, the register or the time. Now here I'm only showing the register. So what we work with in doing these comparisons, we calculate the relative similarity or difference, yeah, in terms of comparing like probability distributions of feature probabilities across these corpora. And that's always the same thing you do here. Yeah? Okay, now let me go to some examples. So one of the big questions is, how do you get interesting and relevant features that will bring out differences between these subcorpora if they exist? Because this is what we're interested in. Now, the selection of features is essentially inspired by linguistic theory or linguistic description, yeah? Things other people have said before that could be interesting, could be distinctive features that are worth looking at. Now, one area that you would suspect there could be interesting differences. Yeah, when you look at these disciplines, they're very different disciplines, bioinformatics and mechanical engineering, or linguistics and electrical engineering, yeah, is actually what are the stances and evaluations that are expressed in these texts, yeah? Because it's not like scientific text does not express stance or evaluation, no, on the contrary, yeah? Okay, so now this is a big question. It's a very abstract question. So how can we tease it out from the material? Yeah. So eventually, I need to find some lexical, grammatical, or lexicogrammatical feature that expresses, yeah, stance and evaluation, or particular values for stance and evaluation. Now, one pattern that colleagues of ours have investigated, that's basically Susan Hunston in Birmingham, they found that there's a particular pattern. It's quite interesting. It is the pattern, it is adjective to, or it is adjective that. Now, when you look at this pattern, it's very interesting. When you just look at the grammatical pattern, you will hardly find any expression that is not evaluative. So it's like this grammatical pattern, it attracts very much evaluative adjectives. That's quite interesting, yeah? Okay, so you've seen the examples, you had time to look at these examples, and you can think about them. So then there's two ways, lexicogrammatically speaking, that you can express this sort of evaluation. So an epistemic stance towards something like in obviously, or it's obvious that, or an attitudinal stance, as in it's interesting that or interestingly, and that is used to use a modal adverb or to use this pattern. Okay, so then the question is, are there differences across these registers we have here or not? So hopefully there are some interesting differences. So what we need to do, we need to extract instances of these patterns. Yeah? We calculate the distribution of these patterns, and then what we could do, we could just, do a statistical test on whether, yeah, this is actually not a random kind of distribution that we see, but that it actually means something. Okay, so just a quick technical thing. So extraction is done of these patterns is done by regular expressions. So the CQP, the Corpus Query Processor query language, is just a regular expression kind of query language, and I can tell you linguists need want, love regular expressions. So don't give a linguist any query tool that doesn't do regular expressions. We need them. We won't be happy without them. Okay, so now this is what you get back, and then of course what you count these things. You don't have to read this. This is a table which gives you the numbers for the occurrences across corpora and across types of expressions. And then that table, of course, you can then calculate, say, a statistical test using the table. Now, to make it more human readable, the relative frequencies of these. Yeah. So what you have here in the orange, yellow shades it's these modal adverbs, and the blue shades is the pattern. And I'll just pick out one thing for you. So what you can see here, for example, bio, that's biology. Yeah, it uses a lot the adverbial, the adverb, and among the different types of adverb, types of meaning that are expressed, it uses very much, interestingly. Now this is relative, yeah? This is relative to the others. It doesn't say it actually occurs, absolutely speaking, very often, but relatively speaking, it uses those quite a lot. Now, when you compare this to this newer discipline that has kind of emerged from biology in cooperation with computer science, if you want, yeah, then you can see a different pattern here. Yeah? And when you test these things statistically, then you can see that it's significant. Yeah? So you can explore this further. Yeah? It's actually quite interesting. Okay, now let me give one more example, and then I probably need to rush. So it's the same idea again. Yeah, it's using slightly different methods in the end, but it's the same idea. Now, also, what we could be interested in looking at these different at these discourses that these disciplines create. We could also be interested in how the actors in these communities and the authors of these papers, but more generally speaking, the actors in these communities, how they construe themselves. What do they think they do? And so one indicator you could use here, it's just one. You could check for the pattern we, what we do. What do we do? We plus a verb, any verb. Okay. So it's the same thing. So you extract instances of the pattern, you look at the distribution, or you make other calculations on the frequency distributions. And in this case, what we used was text classification, automatic text classification, using a support vector machine. Okay, so what you get from this are two things. Yeah. So you get, when you apply this classifier, you can see the verbs, the instances of verbs that are used, and they're used with a particular frequency, of course, and then you can also rank these. Now, when we compare computer science, computational linguistics, and linguistics, you can see here, yeah, so computer science tends to act very formally. We prove, we show, we obtain, and so on. Computational linguistics, these days, that's 2000s, it acts very experimentally, if you want. Examine, implement, use. And linguistics is a bit of a mixture of things, yeah? So linguists tend to propose, suggest, argue a lot, I guess, and they can also feel and see. So this is not, and this is really distinctive, yeah? Okay, another thing that is interesting it's another product of the classification you can look at. And the product you can look at, which comes about by the automatic classification, is what we call the confusion matrix. So when you apply a classifier, you never really get 100% accuracy. So the classifier, the automatic classifier takes these feature distributions and the individual text, and it makes a prediction about, given these features, which class does a particular text belong to. Now, this is never 100% correct. Now, you can look at the confusion matrix and see what the error is that happens and where the error happens. So when you look at this, so again, this is comparing computer science, computational linguistics, and linguistics, yeah? Where do most of the misclassifications occur? Now, most of the misclassifications occur actually for computational linguistics. So that thing, that discipline that is somehow, perhaps, in between computer science and linguistics. So most of these misclassifications occur for computational linguistics, and only very few, these are the green numbers, occur between computer science and linguistics. Yeah? So does that then mean, yeah, that computational linguistics is actually in between the two? And also the other thing, you can see that computational linguistics is very often misclassified as linguistics. Yeah? More often than it is misclassified as computer science, and linguistics is more often misclassified as computational linguistics than computer science is misclassified as computational linguistics. Yeah? So does that mean that computational linguistics is still, it's in between, but it's still closer to linguistics? I'm not sure. Yeah, we have to explore this further. But this is a kind of a product that is created from the classification that you could then still explore to find an answer to your question. Okay, I think I'll stop here with the examples. I have more examples which are interesting. I said that we also have marked up the document structure, so you could also bring the document structure into, as a factor if you want. Are these things differently distributed according to the sections of the document and so on? But let me try to wrap this up. So, so this is that picture, yeah? So as a linguist, you have a soup and you want to bring some order into the soup and maybe more, yeah? And you have particular processing pipelines to do this, but you have to build them. That's part of the process. Now, what's the modeling that is involved here? Now, there is a lot of computational modeling, of course, but that's not a modeling we do, yeah? So we as linguists, we use things that were modeled by computer scientists or computational linguists. And in these models, I mean, these models are influenced by a lot of things, by probability theory, information theory, linguistic theory, formal grammar, and so on. And maybe we don't have to know so much about them, but we should know a little bit about them. We should know at least that we can rely on them. We should know, we should be able to trust them in the sense that we should know how to make sure that we find the best part of speech tagger for our purposes, or the best syntactic parser for our purpose, and so on. Yeah? So that is also some knowledge that I think a digital humanist who's doing work like we are doing should know. Okay, a formal grammar comes into play, you know, like regular expressions, context-free grammars. They come in, for example, at the language at the end of the query language. So we should also know a little bit about this. Yeah, what can they do for us? And then at the end of the analysis, in the very end, I mean, there's statistics there. There's probability theory. I'm sorry, we also have to know something about that, I assume, and we have to learn. Okay, now in terms of tools, yeah, the pipeline is, of course, plugging tools together. So various tools have been plugged together here. And I guess the creative process in this is not so much. Well, it's also a technical challenge. You have to plug these tools together, but it's also to think about these workflows that you create and which tools can create the right workflows for you. Okay, now, requirements on data modeling for linguistics. Maybe it's not data modeling, but now I don't know. So I just left it there. Okay, data modeling comes into play in a narrower sense, of course, when you make the corpus. Yeah, so you have to encode the corpus, you have to compile it, you have to think about the formats, and you have to think about the types of information that you include in the corpus. One thing that is important here is that I think to make the corpus addressable, you do have to identify the relevant objects of your study. And we talked about what are the objects of our study and how do we perhaps also decompose a particular object of study, what are the units that we're looking at. And I think we do need some agreement on what these units are we're looking at. Okay, then there's computational processing. Well, there's a lot of task-specific models that are in this workflow, yeah? Rather than one overarching model. So I wouldn't know at this moment how I would construe an overarching model for all of this. I don't know, but there's various models in it. And each of these models, at least for the computational processing, they can be tested for adequacy. And that's another aspect of a model, I think. A model has to be testable. Okay, corpus analysis tools. Back in the 1990s, corpus linguists still thought that they could build the ideal corpus tools, and there were a number of projects in Europe that tried to do this, like the MATE or the NIGHT project, to those of you who have heard about these projects. So at the beginning of the 2000s, then there was this awareness developed that it's probably not possible to build this ideal tool. So instead, we have task-specific tools, and then we build pipelines, yeah, like this. For that, of course, we have to make sure that the tools are compatible in some way. Yeah, that's the trade-off, if you want. And nowadays, in corpus linguistics, or in people in corpus linguistics who are concerned with building tools, this is what they do. Yeah, they think about the processing pipelines and how they try to make tools compatible in the sense of some interchange language or pivot language that we can use between the tools and so on. Now, I actually like this because this recognizes, this also gives recognition to the diversity of approaches or tools that you can apply to one object. Yeah? You may have a favorite part of speech tagger, and if they're all pluggable, yeah, you can do it. If you have just one monolithic tool, you have no choice. So I actually favor this. Okay, let's go back here. Now, anyhow, so whatever the object is you have, I think it might be a soup or it might be a poem or a picture. I do think that one has to think seriously about the smaller bits and pieces that it consists of, and that we can agree to some extent what these are, because only if we agree we can also share the properties that we want to assign to them. And I finish with a quote from the webpage describing Eugene Cherniak, who says, and you can try to translate this to humanities. Eugene Cherniak is interested in programming computers to understand language so that they will be able to perform such tasks as answering questions and holding a conversation. Well, how big is that? Yeah, it's quite big, and we have similar big things, I think. So, and then it goes on, this is far beyond our current capabilities, so research proceeds by dividing the problems up into manageable subparts. Okay, that's it.
A quick thought on the last slide, this quote by Professor Cherniak, who was wonderful. You said how, programming computers so that they'd be able to perform tasks such as answering questions. How big is that? And I thought, well, I don't know. Let's ask Watson. But then, oh no, Watson doesn't answer questions. He provides the question for the answer. So it's well, coming from anyway.
You said before that. When I expressed my being astonished by this relationship between gender and specific, that okay, we had. I was astonished years ago, but now I'm not. And then you talk about what you're looking at, but actually the things you're looking at, if you the register, the definition of register, implies a statistical feature. So you're correlating statistical information with statistics. So, okay, that's not.
I know.
So yeah, I just wanted to point out that's not that amazing as having
Yes,
this.
I know.
Okay.
You're absolutely right.
I have a question about this. You could consider corpus being one concept in the data model. And then you measure the heterogeneity between the corpi. But there is this old saying that heterogeneity within subgroups is always larger than between subgroups. So that means that within computational linguistics, the heterogeneity of the researchers who are in that pool would be larger than the heterogeneity between the corpi. Right? So the thing is, and I think it's a general problem we have, right, with data models. We define certain things which are supposedly discrete or hierarchically independent, but then we find out properties between them if we then measure, but we are not really sure if in there the same things happen. Right? So, classic example, Iraq versus Turkey, you could measure the difference and the similarity, but then you don't talk about curves, which are obviously a big part of the similarity, for example, right? So, is there a way to, you could do the same analysis on author level, for example.
Yes. Yeah, you could tease this out and find out.
The slide with the bar graphs showing biology and bioinformatics made me wonder, can you go back to it?
Yeah.
Bioinformatics had such an extreme difference from the others that I immediately began wondering, how large is the population of these? And is it possible that, the population of speakers of these registers, or writers of these registers, is it possible that just as linguists writing in Massachusetts tend to sound alike because they all sound like one guy? I'm wondering if it's possible for influential writers to affect the sound of an interdisciplinary field more easily than of a large field. And now I remembered it exactly wrong. It's biology that's the extreme outlier. Yeah. But I'm still interested in the relative size of the populations. Do you have any sense of that?
I see this and I think, can I give you THQ?
Yeah.
Because I think it's an interesting corpus, exactly on a boundary layer, but I don't know what the two other where we have to be
Yeah, I was wondering about doing this for digital humanities, but then I was wondering how many disciplines actually go into digital humanities, because you're mostly looking at, as I understand it from what you're studying, is more or less two fields coming together, or two fields overlapping to create a new field, whereas with digital humanities we have, I guess it depends on how you count,
well, it's about
a field, but would that, I'm wondering how that would play into your model. I mean, if you have, historians, literary scholars, cultural anthropologists, right? Computer scientists, computational linguists, and a couple of other groups and fields. Whether you see as much differentiation, is that just up? Can you see a basic divide into smaller, break it up into just two nodes, or do you think it would actually mess with the model?
You could have more than, I don't see a problem with having more than three, or more than two coming together. You have to think about it. Or in terms of the design, how you design
we need to give the journal
analysis.
4 years to accumulate.
Yeah.
We have one more question, so who's going to wait for artists? Larry, are you?
Well, sure. Let's see, where was I going to go with this? Actually, somebody else can, because I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I think it's very interesting that it's worth looking at the model of selection here. And both point and Michael's point drive at that it may well be that you had chosen 3 other biology journals instead of the 3 you could get your hands on because they happen to be digitized and freely available or whatever, you find different results. And it also might be the case you find exactly the same results. That seems to me to be really interesting, that how much does the selection model actually influence our thoughts and how we interpret the outcome. And I think DH2 and other journals or sources of data that are less uniform in their approach, if they gave us the same results, would give us a kind of a taste of how much that is in fact